weeks earlier, a warm Friday evening in early October, Richmond, Virginia. Lorenzo Adams sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a half-eaten bowl of cereal beside it. He was 17, skinny, quiet eyes, the kind of kid who said, "Yes, ma'am," without being reminded. He was rehearsing a debate argument. The topic? Criminal justice reform. He mouthed the words silently, tapping his pencil against the table like a metronome. His mother, Denise, moved through the kitchen behind him. She wore hospital scrubs and her hair pulled back tight. A pediatric surgeon, 12-hour overnight shifts, 3 days a week. She packed a turkey sandwich into a brown bag and kissed the top of Lorenzo's head on her way past. "Your father sends his love," she said. "He'll call after his meetings." Lorenzo rolled his eyes, not with anger, but with the kind of affection only a teenager can disguise as annoyance. "He always says that. And he always calls, doesn't he?" She was right. He always did. His father, Raymond Adams, was away on work. That's all Lorenzo ever said about it. Dad travels. Dad has meetings. Dad is important, but doesn't talk about it. There was a framed photo on the hallway wall, Raymond in a dark suit, shaking hands with officials at some ceremony. Lorenzo passed it every day without stopping. It was just Dad being Dad. Their home was modest. Clean floors, warm light, a couch with a blanket thrown over one arm, 3 photos above the TV, Lorenzo in a cap and gown from middle school, the family at the Grand Canyon, and a candid shot of him laughing with his arms around his mother's neck. This was a home where someone was loved. You could feel it the moment you walked through the door. That evening, Lorenzo helped his elderly neighbor carry grocery bags from her car to the front porch. She handed him a butterscotch candy. He thanked her and slipped it in his pocket. He texted his best friend, Terrence Cole. "Movie marathon tonight? I'm bringing the chips." Before bed, he read 2 pages from a civil rights memoir and underlined a sentence about dignity. Then he closed the book and fell asleep. That was Lorenzo Adams. That was the boy the system was about to destroy. Now let me tell you about the world he lived in. Richmond had a history, the kind nobody puts on a tourism brochure. Racial tension in the police force stretched back decades. 3 months earlier, a use of force incident sparked protests downtown. A black man pinned to the pavement. Cell phone footage, outrage, candles and cardboard signs. The police chief promised tougher enforcement. Everyone knew what that meant. More patrol cars in certain neighborhoods, more stops, more hands pressed flat on hoods of cars for people who looked a certain way. Lorenzo's neighborhood sat right on the invisible line. One side had manicured lawns, ring doorbells, and private security signs staked into flower beds. The other had community watch flyers taped to telephone poles, and patrol cars circling slow enough to count every crack in the sidewalk. At night, crickets sang. Porch lights flickered amber. A siren whooped once across town and went quiet. A helicopter searchlight swept a neighborhood 2 blocks over. Routine, but never comfortable. The kind of thing you learn to sleep through, but never stop noticing. Friday night. Lorenzo and Terrence walked to a convenience store 6 blocks away for movie snacks. Chips, soda, maybe gummy worms if the good ones were in stock. They walked side by side in hoodies and sneakers. Lorenzo had his debate notebook in his backpack. They were laughing about something stupid Terrence said in class that morning. The street was quiet. Streetlights threw orange pools across the pavement. A dog barked behind a chain-link fence, then gave up. The air smelled like cut grass and cooling charcoal. Normal. Ordinary. Safe. And then, headlights. A patrol car rolled past slowly. Lorenzo glanced at it. Terence kept talking. The car passed. Then it stopped. Then it reversed. Red and blue lights flashed to life. The spotlight hit both boys square in the face. Lorenzo raised his hand to shield his eyes. The radio crackled, loud, sharp, like something breaking. Two teenage boys, walking home with empty hands and full backpacks. And behind them, a police cruiser, lighting up the night like the beginning of the end. Because that's exactly what it was. The driver's side door swung open. A boot hit the pavement. Then another. Officer Dale Granger stepped out like he owned the street. White, mid-30s, buzz cut so tight his scalp shone under the streetlight. One hand on his belt, fingers inches from his holster. His body camera blinked red on his chest, recording everything, though he didn't seem to care. He walked toward the boys the way a dog walks toward a cornered rabbit. Slow, certain, already decided. "Where are you two headed?" Lorenzo lowered his hand from his eyes. The spotlight was still burning into them. He could barely see the officer's face, just a silhouette and a voice. "We're just walking to my friend's house, sir," Lorenzo said. Calm, steady. Every word chosen the way his parents trained him to choose words in moments exactly like this one. "We live a few blocks from here." Granger didn't acknowledge a single word. He looked at Lorenzo, then at Terence. His jaw shifted like he was chewing something bitter. "You match a description." 5 words. No explanation, no details, no probable cause. Just 5 words and a badge, and suddenly 2 teenagers buying gummy worms were suspects. "A description of what, sir?" Lorenzo asked, still polite, still measured. "Did I say you could ask questions?" Granger stepped closer, close enough that Lorenzo could smell the coffee on his breath and the leather of his holster. "IDs, both of you, now." Lorenzo reached slowly into his back pocket and pulled out his school ID. Jefferson High School, Junior. The photo showed a kid with a shy half smile. Granger snatched it, glanced at it for less than a second, and shoved it back at Lorenzo's chest. "What about you?" He turned to Terence. Terence's hands were shaking. I don't have one on me, sir." Granger stared at him, then pointed at the curb. "Sit down. Don't move. Don't speak." Terence sat. His sneakers scraped the concrete. 16 years old, and trying not to cry on a public sidewalk, while a grown man with a gun told him to be silent. Granger turned back to Lorenzo. "Face the car. Hands on the hood. Spread your legs." "Officer, I haven't done anything." "I said, face the car." Lorenzo turned. He placed his palms flat on the hood. The metal was warm from the engine. He could feel the vibration through his fingertips. His heart was slamming so hard he was sure Granger could hear it. Be calm. Be respectful. Survive the moment. His father's words, drilled into him since he was 12. The talk every black parent in America gives their child. Not about the birds and the bees, but about how to stay alive when a man with a badge decides you look like trouble. Granger unzipped Lorenzo's backpack without asking. No warrant, no consent, no probable cause. Just a man in uniform going through a teenager's belongings like it was his God-given right. He pulled out the debate notebook first, flipped through the pages, handwritten arguments, research notes, highlighted quotes from Supreme Court cases. Granger looked at it like junk mail. Then he tossed it on the ground. The pages fanned open on the damp sidewalk. 3 weeks of work, on the concrete, like garbage. Lorenzo flinched. He kept his hands on the hood and his eyes straight ahead. Granger kept digging. A pack of gum, a phone charger, a pencil case. Each item tossed on the ground, one by one, like he was daring Lorenzo to react. Then he found it. A small red Swiss Army knife, 2 inches, folded. A birthday gift from Lorenzo's grandfather, his name engraved on the handle. Lorenzo used it to sharpen pencils and open packages. Legal. Completely legal for a 17-year-old to carry in Virginia. Granger held it up to the spotlight like he'd discovered a murder weapon. Well, well, well. His voice dripped with satisfaction. What do we have here? A weapon. Sir, that's just a— Shut your mouth. Granger grabbed Lorenzo's arm and yanked it behind his back. The cuff snapped around his right wrist, then the left. The metal bit into his skin. Too tight. Deliberately too tight. Officer, it's a Swiss Army knife. It's legal. Please. I said, shut your mouth. You're under arrest. Terrence jumped to his feet. He didn't do anything. We were just walking. You can't. Granger spun around and closed the distance in 2 steps. He grabbed Terrence by the collar and slammed him against the patrol car. The boy's head bounced off the metal with a dull thud. A thin line of blood appeared at his temple. You want to join him? Sit down and shut up, or you're next. Terrence slid back to the curb, pressing his shaking hands between his knees. Too afraid to wipe the blood running down his face. A second squad car pulled up. 2 more officers stepped out. Both white, both calm. Both looking at the 2 black teenagers like this was just another Friday. Because for them, it was. 3 officers, 2 teenage boys, 0 crimes committed. And nobody stopped. Nobody rolled down a window. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains, with the quiet understanding that this was how things worked. 20 minutes earlier, a convenience store 2 blocks south had been robbed. The suspect description? Black male, dark hoodie. No height, no weight, no age. A description that matched half the teenage boys in Richmond on any Friday night. The actual robber was a heavy-set man in his 30s, with a neck tattoo and a scar across his left cheek. He looked nothing like Lorenzo. He was already 6 miles away, counting cash in a parking lot. Granger didn't care about accuracy. He cared about numbers. He keyed his radio and spoke the words that would rearrange Lorenzo's entire life. 2 suspects detained matching robbery description. 1 armed with a bladed weapon, requesting transport. Armed with a bladed weapon. A Swiss Army knife with his grandfather's name on it. Lorenzo stood in cuffs under the flashing lights and said nothing. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew, at 17, he already knew that his words meant nothing here. His school ID meant nothing. His debate trophies and honor roll certificates meant nothing. Here, he was just a black kid in a hoodie, and that was enough. Terrence was released, no evidence to hold him. He stood on the sidewalk, with blood drying on his temple and tears cutting lines down his face, watching his best friend get folded into a patrol car for the crime of buying snacks. "I'll call your mom," Terrence shouted, his voice cracking. "I'll call her right now." Lorenzo looked at him through the window. The door slammed shut before a word could escape. The ride was 11 minutes. Lorenzo sat behind the mesh divider, wrists aching, the vinyl seat smelling like sweat and disinfectant. Through the window, his neighborhood slid past. The same streets, the same houses, the same porches. But tonight, they looked like they belonged to someone else's life. At the station, he was walked through a side entrance. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. The linoleum squeaked under his sneakers. "I'd like to call my mother, please," he said. The booking officer didn't look up. "Have a seat. You'll get your call." He was photographed, front and side. The flash left white spots in his vision. He was fingerprinted, each finger rolled across the ink pad until his skin was stained black. He stared at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. He was placed in a holding cell, concrete bench, steel toilet with no seat, fluorescent lights that hummed and never turned off. The air tasted like bleach and something sour underneath. He was 17 years old. He had never been inside a police station in his life. "Please," he said again to the empty hallway. "I need to call my mom." 1 hour. 2. 3. No phone call. No lawyer. No explanation. Just a boy on a concrete bench in a room that smelled like the end of everything, wondering what he did wrong. Then the charge changed. Somewhere in the station, in a room Lorenzo would never see, someone looked at the report and made a decision. Suspicion of robbery became armed robbery because of a 2-inch pocket knife with an old man's name on the handle. Armed robbery for a boy who was walking to his friend's house to watch movies. This was the moment the machine started grinding, not because evidence supported it, but because the system had a body and needed a case. And Lorenzo Adams, 17, black, wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin, was close enough. The gears turned, the paperwork multiplied, and a life heading toward college applications and debate championships was now heading somewhere much, much darker. The system moved fast when it wanted to. Not fast for justice, fast for punishment. Lorenzo's bail hearing happened 48 hours after his arrest. Denise sat in the front row, wearing a blouse she'd ironed at 4 in the morning. Her eyes were swollen. She hadn't slept. She'd hired an attorney, a good one, and she believed her son would come home that day. The arraignment judge read the charge out loud. Armed robbery. He looked at Lorenzo over his reading glasses. Bail is denied, given the severity of the charge and potential flight risk. Denise stood up. Flight risk? He's 17. He's never left the state. He's a junior in high school. Ma'am, sit down, or I'll have you removed. She sat. Her knuckles turned gray, gripping the bench. Her son was being treated like a career criminal, and the system didn't blink. It got worse. The attorney Denise hired discovered a conflict of interest and withdrew. 5 days before the preliminary hearing. Denise scrambled for a replacement, but time ran out. The court appointed a public defender. His name was Neil Dawson. Dawson met Lorenzo once. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. He walked into the visitation room with folders under one arm and a coffee stain on his tie. He sat down, opened the wrong file first, then found the right one. Lorenzo Adams? He said the name like he was reading it for the first time. Because he was. Yes, sir. Dawson scanned the page. He didn't ask what happened that night, didn't ask about the search, didn't ask about the knife. He closed the folder after 8 minutes, told Lorenzo he'd do his best, and left. 12 minutes. That was what Lorenzo's entire future was worth to the system. Lorenzo was transferred to a juvenile detention facility. The transport van smelled like rust and urine. The handcuffs were chained to a bolt on the floor. The facility was a nightmare made of concrete, cold walls, steel doors that clanged shut and echoed for seconds afterward, fluorescent lights that buzzed 24 hours a day, never off, never dimming. The sheets on his cot were thin as paper. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and sweat and something rotten underneath. Boys shouted through the walls at night. Someone cried every single night around 2 in the morning. Lorenzo never found out who. He lay on that cot and stared at the ceiling and thought about his debate notebook, the one Granger threw on the wet sidewalk. He wondered if the pages had dried. He wondered if Terence picked it up. He wondered if any of this was real. Now, here's something important. Where was his father? Raymond Adams was in Washington, D.C. He had been there for 5 days on a federal task force assignment. Classified briefings. Restricted communications. His phone was locked in a security box 16 hours a day. He had no idea his son had been arrested. No idea his wife had been calling his office every hour, leaving messages that got more desperate each time. Denise called Raymond's chief of staff. The chief of staff said, "I'll relay the message as soon as I can." That was on Monday. By Wednesday, no message had been relayed. The audience doesn't know yet what Raymond does for a living. They only know he's Lorenzo's father, that he travels, that he has important meetings, that his son needed him and he wasn't there. In the detention center's common room, a television mounted high on the wall played the news. A headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Something about a state attorney general and a federal task force. Lorenzo wasn't watching. He was sitting in a plastic chair, staring at the wall, pressing his thumbnail into his own palm, just to feel something besides fear. Meanwhile, the evidence that could free him already existed. The convenience store's surveillance camera had recorded the entire robbery. The footage was clear. A single adult male, heavyset, visible neck tattoo, mid-30s at least. He moved nothing like a teenager. He looked nothing like Lorenzo. Officer Granger reviewed that footage. He sat in a precinct office, watched the tape on a monitor, and saw, with his own eyes, that the man on the screen was not the boy he had arrested. He filed his report anyway. In the report, Granger wrote that the suspect matches the general physical description and that the recovered knife constitutes a deadly weapon consistent with the commission of the robbery. Every word is a lie. Every sentence is a nail in a 17-year-old's coffin. Granger knew. He didn't care. His arrest numbers mattered more than a kid's life. The case file landed on the desk of prosecutor Brenda Hollis. She was sharp, experienced. She read the file and noticed the gaps, the vague description, the lack of stolen property, the questionable search. She knew the case was weak. She pushed it forward anyway. Her conviction rate was 91%. She intended to keep it there. The trial was fast-tracked, and the case was assigned to Judge Harold Whitfield. Let me tell you about Harold Whitfield. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a portrait of himself, oil on canvas, gilded frame, hanging in the hallway outside his courtroom. He'd sat on that bench for 28 years. He called himself a guardian of order. Others called him something else. Here's a number that matters. Over his career, black defendants in Whitfield's courtroom received sentences that were, on average, 2.4 times longer than white defendants charged with identical crimes. The same offense, the same circumstances, double the punishment. Every single time. Nobody had done anything about it. Not yet. The trial lasted less than a week, and it was a disaster. Neil Dawson, the public defender who had met Lorenzo for 12 minutes, called zero witnesses. He did not introduce the convenience store footage. He did not challenge the legality of the search. He did not question Granger's report. He did not object to a single piece of evidence the prosecution presented. His closing argument lasted 2 minutes. 2 minutes. For a boy facing life in prison. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They came back with one word: guilty. Lorenzo heard it, and his legs buckled. The bailiff caught him by the arm. Behind him, Denise let out a sound that wasn't a scream and wasn't a word. It was the sound of a mother's heart being ripped from her chest in a room full of strangers who didn't care. The courtroom was mostly empty. A few reporters, a clerk filing her nails. Nobody was paying attention to another black teenager being convicted in America. It wasn't news. It was Tuesday. Nah, hold on. This part? Right here? Yeah, this one pissed me off. The evidence was literally right there, on camera, and nobody even bothered to look. You got a public defender spending like 12 minutes on a life sentence. 12. And the system just didn't care. I'm not gonna lie. This next part? Yeah, it had me shaking. 2 weeks later. Sentencing day. And now we're back to where this story began. Judge Harold Whitfield sat high on his bench and looked down at Lorenzo Adams. Orange jumpsuit. Handcuffs. A boy who had lost 15 pounds since his arrest because he couldn't eat. A boy who hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. A boy whose eyes had gone flat and empty, like someone had reached inside him and turned off the light. Whitfield adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat, and he gave a speech. The decay of values in our communities is a cancer, he said. Young men like you think you can terrorize decent, hard-working citizens and face no consequences. This court will not tolerate it. This court will make an example. Young men like you. He said it slowly. He said it looking directly at Lorenzo's face. And everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. The defendant is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom gasped. Even Brenda Hollis, the prosecutor who had pushed this case through despite knowing the evidence was thin, looked shaken. Her pen slipped from her fingers and clattered on the table. She said nothing. Denise screamed. She lunged forward. A bailiff grabbed her by both arms and held her back. She fought him. This woman who spent her days saving children's lives, now clawing at the air trying to reach her own child. My baby didn't do anything. He's innocent. Please, please, somebody help him. Nobody helped. Lorenzo stood motionless. Tears ran down his face, but he made no sound. His mouth was slightly open, like he'd started to speak and forgotten how. His hands hung at his sides in the cuffs, and he stared at the judge with the hollow expression of someone who has just watched his own life end. 17 years old, life without parole, for walking to a store to buy gummy worms. And the judge didn't blink. 2 weeks later, sentencing day. And now we're back to where this story began. Judge Harold Whitfield sat high on his bench and looked down at Lorenzo Adams. Orange jumpsuit. Handcuffs. A boy who had lost 15 pounds since his arrest because he couldn't eat. A boy whose eyes had gone flat and empty, like someone reached inside him and turned off the light. Whitfield adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat, and he gave a speech. "The decay of values in our communities is a cancer," he said. "Young men like you think you can terrorize decent, hard-working citizens and face no consequences. This court will make an example. Young men like you." He said it slowly, looking directly at Lorenzo's face. Everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. "The defendant is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom gasped. Even Brenda Hollis looked shaken. Her pen slipped from her fingers. She said nothing. Denise screamed. A bailiff grabbed her by both arms. She fought him, this woman who saved children's lives every day, now clawing at the air to reach her own child. "My baby didn't do anything. He's innocent. Somebody help him." Nobody helped. Nobody moved. Lorenzo stood motionless. Tears ran down his face, but he made no sound. His hands hung in the cuffs. His mouth was open, but nothing came out. 17 years old. Life without parole. And the judge didn't blink. The bailiff stepped forward to take Lorenzo away, and then the double doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open. Every head turned. A tall black man in a dark three-piece suit stood in the doorway. His shoulders were broad, his jaw was set like concrete. 2 aides flanked him. Behind them, a Virginia state trooper in full uniform. The man walked forward, not fast, not slow. Each footstep landed on the marble floor like a gavel strike. The sound echoed through the silence. He didn't look left, he didn't look right. His eyes were locked on one thing: his son, standing in chains at the front of the courtroom. Judge Whitfield leaned forward, irritated. "This is a closed sentencing hearing. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be held in contempt." The man didn't stop walking. He reached the front of the courtroom. He looked at Lorenzo. And for one single moment, his composure cracked. His jaw trembled. His eyes glistened. A father looking at his child in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. Then he turned to face Judge Whitfield. He straightened his tie, and he spoke. Not loud, not angry. Calm, measured. Every syllable sharp enough to cut glass. "My name is Raymond Adams. I am the Attorney General of this state." The courtroom went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind you can feel pressing against your eardrums. Raymond paused. He looked at his son one more time. Then back at the judge. "And that boy you just sentenced to life in prison is my son." Whitfield's face was drained of color. Not slowly, all at once, like someone pulled a plug. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hands, which had been folded with such authority moments ago, began to shake. The prosecutor, Brenda Hollis, dropped her pen a second time. This time, she didn't pick it up. She stared at Raymond Adams, like she was watching her career burn in real time. Neil Dawson, the public defender, sank so low in his chair he nearly disappeared behind the table. The bailiff, who had been reaching for Lorenzo, stepped back, then stepped back again. Raymond reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and produced a manila folder. He held it up so the entire courtroom could see. "In my hand is a copy of the convenience store surveillance footage, which this court never reviewed, showing clearly that my son was not the perpetrator. The suspect on camera is an adult male in his 30s, heavy-set, with a visible neck tattoo. My son is a 17-year-old honors student who weighs 140 pounds. He set the folder on the table. I also have a copy of Officer Dale Granger's body camera footage. It shows an illegal stop conducted without probable cause, an illegal search conducted without consent or a warrant, and a fabricated arrest report that Officer Granger filed knowing that the evidence did not match. He let that sentence hang in the air. Then he turned to Brenda Hollis. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Ms. Hollis, you will be hearing from my office regarding prosecutorial misconduct. Hollis opened her mouth, closed it, said nothing. He turned to Neil Dawson. Mr. Dawson, the State Bar will be reviewing your handling of this case. Dawson didn't look up. Raymond turned back to Whitfield. The judge's hands were visibly trembling now. Your Honor, and I use that title loosely, your sentencing patterns have been under review by my office for the past 18 months. Today, you accelerated that timeline considerably. Whitfield found his voice. Barely. Now wait. I followed proper procedure. Raymond cut him off. Not with volume, with precision. You sentenced a child with no criminal record to life without parole for a crime that the evidence proves he did not commit. That is not procedure, Your Honor. That is malice. Silence. Raymond turned away from the bench. He walked to his son. He removed his own suit jacket and draped it over Lorenzo's thin shoulders. Then he wrapped his arms around him. Lorenzo broke. Not the quiet tears from before, not the frozen silence. He broke completely. Deep, shaking sobs that echoed through the courtroom. His face pressed into his father's chest. His cuffed hands gripped the fabric of his father's shirt. 17 years of being strong, being polite, being calm, being respectful. All of it collapsed at once into the arms of the one person he needed most. Denise rushed forward. The bailiff didn't stop her this time. Nobody stopped her. She wrapped her arms around both of them, her husband and her son, and the three of them held each other in the middle of that courtroom. And every single person who had failed Lorenzo Adams, the judge, the prosecutor, the public defender, the officers, the clerk, the system itself, watched in silence. Nobody in that courtroom moved for what felt like a full minute. The only sound was Lorenzo sobbing into his father's chest and the hum of fluorescent lights above. Then the gavel came down. Not from authority, from panic. Judge Whitfield slammed it once and choked out 2 words. Court recess! His voice cracked. He stood so fast his chair hit the wall. He gathered his robes with trembling hands and disappeared through the side door. His clerk scrambled after him, phone pressed to her ear, whispering fast. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs, gasps. Reporters in the back row reached for their phones. The words Attorney General rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. Brenda Hollis stood at the prosecution table, face the color of old paper. She smoothed her jacket, picked up her pen, put it down. Then she walked toward Raymond Adams. Mr. Adams, I want you to understand, I relied on the police report. The evidence, as presented, indicated. Raymond turned to face her. He didn't raise his voice. You had the surveillance footage request form in your file. You chose not to subpoena it. You had inconsistencies any first-year law student would have caught. You chose to ignore them. A 17-year-old with no record, no motive, no stolen property, and you prosecuted him anyway. He paused. I relied on the police report is not a defense, Ms. Hollis. It's a confession. This conversation is over. Hollis picked up her briefcase with both hands. One alone was shaking too hard. She sat back down like a woman waiting for the floor to swallow her. Neil Dawson didn't attempt a conversation. He packed his files with his head down, walked out through the side door, and didn't make eye contact with a single person. That was the last anyone in that courtroom saw of him. Within 2 hours, Raymond filed an emergency motion to vacate the conviction, citing suppressed evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, unlawful search, and ineffective counsel. The special motions judge granted it before end of business. Lorenzo's conviction was vacated. The cuffs came off. A deputy removed them gently, far more gently than they'd been put on. Lorenzo rubbed his wrists, bruises, yellow and purple, weeks old. Denise held his hand as they walked down the courthouse hallway. Raymond walked on his other side. Lorenzo still wore the orange jumpsuit. Nobody had brought him clothes. His father's jacket hung over his shoulders like a shield. They pushed through the front doors. The sun hit Lorenzo's face, and he stopped. Just stopped. He closed his eyes and breathed, a long, slow, shaking breath. The kind you take when you've been holding your lungs tight for weeks and finally let go. The air smelled like warm concrete and cut grass from the courthouse lawn. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever smelled. Reporters had gathered at the bottom of the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, voices overlapped. And Lorenzo didn't speak. He wasn't ready. Raymond stepped forward. His voice was steady, but underneath the composure, you could hear the fracture. A father who almost lost his son. My son is coming home. The justice system failed him completely. We will make sure it never fails another child this way. That was all. He put his arm around Lorenzo. Denise took his other hand. The three of them walked down the courthouse steps together. Behind them, inside the building, Officer Dale Granger received a phone call. The AG's office had flagged his arrest report. Granger's first reaction was denial. I followed procedure. The kid matched the description. When told the body camera footage contradicted every word of his report, he went quiet. He was placed on immediate administrative leave. Badge and weapon collected. His union released a statement calling it politically motivated. Nobody believed it. What happened next didn't take weeks. It took days. Because when the Attorney General of a state turns his eyes on your courtroom, your precinct, or your case file, the walls start closing in fast. Raymond Adams did something important first. He recused himself. Publicly. Formally. He stood in front of cameras and said, "This is my son's case. I will not oversee the investigation personally. I am appointing a special prosecutor to ensure complete independence and transparency." Some people called it noble. Others called it strategic. It was both. The special prosecutor's name was Vivian Cross, a former federal attorney with a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and completely uninterested in politics. She took the case on a Monday. By Friday, the walls were already caving in. Her team pulled Officer Dale Granger's personnel file first. What they found inside was a pattern so clear it could have been drawn with a ruler. 14 prior complaints of racial profiling. 14. Filed by citizens over a 6-year period. Black men stopped for matching a description. Black teenagers questioned for looking suspicious. A black woman pulled over 3 times in 1 month on the same road because Granger said her taillight looked dim. Every single complaint had been reviewed internally by the department. Every single one had been dismissed. The words unsubstantiated and insufficient evidence appeared in the files so often they might as well have been stamped there in advance. 14 complaints, 0 consequences. Until now. Next, Cross pulled Judge Harold Whitfield's sentencing records. 28 years of data, thousands of cases. Her analysts ran the numbers, and the results were devastating. Black defendants in Whitfield's courtroom received sentences that were, on average, 2.4 times longer than white defendants convicted of identical charges. Same crime, same circumstances, same criminal history. Double the punishment. Exposed in a spreadsheet that would eventually be projected on screens across the country. But it wasn't just the numbers. Cross found individual cases that made the pattern personal. A white college student convicted of armed robbery, sentenced to 3 years, suspended. A black father convicted of the same charge, same amount stolen, no prior record, sentenced to 19 years. Same judge, same courtroom, same crime. 19 years versus 3. Whitfield had been doing this for nearly 3 decades, and not a single person in the judicial system had stopped him. Then Cross turned to the prosecution. Brenda Hollis's case files were subpoenaed. The review uncovered a pattern of suppressing exculpatory evidence, evidence that would have helped defendants in cases involving minority defendants. In Lorenzo's case specifically, Hollis had access to the surveillance footage request form and chose not to pursue it. She had notes in her own handwriting flagging inconsistencies in officers' account, and she'd crossed them out with a single line and moved forward. Her own notes convicted her. Finally, the public defender's office. Neil Dawson wasn't a monster. He was a symptom. The investigation revealed that his office was operating at 340% capacity. Dawson was handling over 200 active cases simultaneously. He didn't fail Lorenzo because he was cruel. He failed him because the system made it impossible to succeed. 12 minutes wasn't laziness. It was all he had. That fact made it worse, not better. Now, the media. Investigative journalist Carolyn Shaw at the Richmond Herald had been following the case since the courtroom reversal. She'd filed public records requests, interviewed witnesses, and obtained the body camera footage through a source in the department. Her story dropped on the Tuesday morning. The headline read, "Honor Student Sentenced to Life, Inside the System That Almost Destroyed Lorenzo Adams." 100,000 times. By Wednesday, every national outlet in the country had picked it up. Cable news ran segments around the clock. The body camera footage was broadcast on every major network, and people saw everything. Granger's hostility, the illegal search, the debate notebook thrown on the wet ground, Lorenzo's calm, quiet compliance, Terrence's blood on his temple, the cuffs snapping shut on a 17-year-old boy whose only crime was existing while black on a Friday night. The public response was massive. Protests formed outside the Richmond courthouse within 48 hours. Thousands of people. Handmade signs, candles. Lorenzo's debate teammates organized a student-led rally at the state capitol. 500 high school students standing on the steps chanting his name. The hashtag trended nationally for 11 straight days. Then came the trials. Officer Dale Granger was indicted by a federal grand jury. The charges? Filing a false police report, civil rights violations under federal statute, unlawful search and seizure, and falsifying evidence. His attorney argued that Granger was following standard department procedure. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Permanently banned from law enforcement in any capacity, in any state, for the rest of his life. When the sentence was read, Granger stared straight ahead. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. The handcuffs went on his wrists, and for the first time in his career, he was on the other side of them. Judge Harold Whitfield's case went to the State Judicial Oversight Commission. The hearing lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. 28 years of data exposed case by case, number by number. Whitfield's attorney argued that sentencing disparities were within judicial discretion. The commission disagreed. Whitfield was removed from the bench, the first sitting judge in the state to be removed in over 40 years. A federal civil rights investigation was opened into his full tenure. His oil portrait was taken down from the courthouse hallway. The nail hole remained. Prosecutor Brenda Hollis was disbarred. The state bar cited a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct, including suppression of exculpatory evidence and failure to disclose material inconsistencies. The Adams family filed a civil lawsuit against her personally. She did not contest it. Neil Dawson was not criminally charged, but Lorenzo's case triggered a statewide audit of public defender funding and caseloads. The results were damning. Understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed. Dawson resigned quietly. He never practiced law again. 3 weeks after Lorenzo's release, the actual robber was identified. His name came from the surveillance footage that had been available from the very first night. He was arrested at a motel 60 miles outside Richmond. He confessed within 2 hours. The man who actually committed the crime had been free for over a month, while a 17-year-old honor student sat in a cell for it. Governor Patricia Ellis held a press conference. She signed an executive order mandating 4 immediate reforms. First, independent review of every sentence Judge Whitfield had issued during his 28 years on the bench. Second, mandatory inclusion of body camera footage in all case files before prosecution. Third, maximum caseload limits for public defenders statewide. Fourth, mandatory racial bias training for every sitting judge in the state. Over 30 of Whitfield's prior convictions were reopened for review. In the first wave alone, 6 defendants were released, men who had served years, some decades, for sentences that never should have been imposed. 6 men walked free, because one boy's father walked through a courtroom door. 6 months later, a Saturday morning in April, the dogwoods along Lorenzo's street were blooming white and pink, petals drifting across the sidewalk like confetti nobody had to clean up. Lorenzo sat on his front porch, the same porch where he'd carried Mrs. Coleman's groceries a lifetime ago. His debate notebook was open on his lap, not the old one, a new one. The old one had been recovered by Terrence the night of the arrest, dried out, pages wrinkled but intact. Lorenzo kept it on his bookshelf now. He never wrote in it again. But on the first page of the new notebook, he had written one line in black ink. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. He went back to school. He didn't talk about what happened unless someone asked, and most people were smart enough not to ask. His teachers noticed he was quieter. His counselor noticed he sat with his back to the wall in every room. Some things don't heal on a schedule. But he showed up. Every single day. He showed up. In May, he competed in the state debate championship. His topic, one he chose himself, was the presumption of innocence and the color of justice. He stood at that podium in a borrowed suit and spoke for 12 minutes without a single note card. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't tremble. He spoke about the system, not as a victim, but as someone who had seen it from the inside and refused to look away. He won. First place, standing ovation. His mother cried in the third row. His father watched from the back, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes shining. Lorenzo was accepted to 3 top universities that fall. He chose to study law. Not because his father was a lawyer, because a public defender once spent 12 minutes on his life, and he swore no one would ever sit across from a kid in a visitation room and call that justice. Some evenings, Lorenzo and his father sat together on the porch. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat. 2 glasses of lemonade, the sound of crickets, the streetlights clicking on one by one. Raymond would put his hand on Lorenzo's shoulder. Lorenzo would lean into it, just slightly. That was enough. Some things don't need words. The ripple effect spread far beyond that porch. Terrence Cole became a community organizer before he finished high school. He started running Know Your Rights workshops for Black teenagers across Richmond. He taught them what to say during a traffic stop, how to record an encounter, when to stay silent. The things nobody should have to teach a child, but everyone has to. Denise Adams co-founded a legal defense fund for juveniles facing wrongful charges. In its first year, it took on 41 cases. 34 resulted in reduced or dismissed charges. Raymond Adams announced that his office would publish annual sentencing disparity data for every judge in the state. Full transparency, no exceptions. The policy was adopted by 2 other states within the year. The Richmond courthouse installed a permanent plaque in the main lobby, brass letters on dark marble. Justice is not just a verdict, it is a commitment. Lorenzo walked past it once on a day he came to speak at a youth legal clinic. He stopped, read it, touched the corner with his fingertip, then kept walking. Aight, real quick. Yeah, the story I just told, that part's made up. But the profiling, fake reports, judges nobody questions, yeah, that's real. That happens every day, especially to kids who don't have someone powerful walking through that door for them. And that's the part that gets me. How many times has this already happened and nobody came? So let me ask you something. If Lorenzo's father hadn't been who he was, if Raymond Adams was just a truck driver or a janitor or an unemployed man who couldn't afford a lawyer, how does this story end? Drop 1. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, hope, not for me. Because somewhere out there, a kid like Lorenzo is sitting in a cell right now. And the only difference between his story and this one is that nobody with power showed up. Stories where justice doesn't just exist on paper, it shows up in the room. Because here's the truth. Justice shouldn't depend on who your father is. It should depend on who we are. All of us. Every single time.